Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the third and final episode of Facets of Impact Season 3, hosted by New Socia. I am Sanjeev Tare, Director Strategic Partnerships at New Socia. New Socia is a strategic CSR design and impact advisory organization. Founded in 2017 to enable the ecosystem for sustainable impact, we are incubated at IIM Bangalore's NSR cell. Our vision is a world where every individual and organization is socially responsible. We are present in 4 countries. In India, we have worked in over 21 states across 14 SDGs. Our topic for discussion today is, are you prepared for a disaster? We are joined by an esteemed panel of experts in disaster risk reduction. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Balaji Singh Chauhan. Balaji has over 40 years of work experience, including 23 years in the field of disaster risk reduction in India and various South Asian countries. He is an expert in the design and operations of incident command system and emergency operations centers. He has designed and managed multi-sectoral humanitarian response actions. Balaji has also consulted extensively with USAID, World Bank, UNDP, UNICEF, ADPC Bangkok, ECHO, and many international non-profits such as Save the Children and Child Funds of India and others. Welcome, Balaji. Our next panel member is Dr. Manu Gupta. Manu is the co-founder of Seeds, which is a non-profit that enables community resilience through practical solutions in the areas of disaster readiness, response, and rehabilitation. Seeds has received the prestigious Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose Apada Prabandhan Puraskar for 2021 and UN Sasakawa Award for 2022. Dr. Manu has 29 years of experience in national and regional advocacy, mobilization of community-led efforts in recovery and risk reduction, and climate change adaptation. He holds degrees in physical planning and urban planning from the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and a doctorate in community-based disaster management from Kyoto University, Japan. Thanks for joining the panel, Manu. Our next eminent panelist is Mr. Gopal Krishna Bhatt. The geologist Gopal Krishna is an independent consultant in natural resource management, disaster risk assessment, and climate change adaptation. He has led teams for developing climate resilience interventions in West Bengal and has led the Himachal Hazard Risk and Vulnerability Atlas project. He has also led the India chapter of Asian Cities Climate Change Resilience Network, which field tested interventions such as cool roof, urban lake rejuvenation, urban services monitoring systems, and early warning systems. Mr. Gopal Krishna Bhatt started his career as a geologist in Geological Survey of India after his post-graduation from the prestigious IIT Roorkee. He has written 2 books on building urban resilience, Road to Resilience and Synergy for Sustainable Cities. Welcome, Mr. Bhatt. Our next panelist and the moderator for today's discussion is Shubham Tandon. Shubham is a project officer at the UNDP, where he has been managing disaster risk management related projects with the environment team since 2016. He has successfully coordinated joint programs with the various central ministries such as the Home Affairs, Urban Affairs, Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and also various state governments. He has worked in the environment sector for over a decade. He has engaged in project management activities related to building rural and urban resilience, environmental protection through disaster risk reduction, and climate change adaptation, sustainable development, and enhancing institutional capacities of the government and local communities. Shubham holds a master's in disaster management and is a gold medalist from the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. A very warm welcome to all our panelists. And thank you, Shubham, for moderating and leading the session today. It's really a pleasure to have all of you here. The webinar will have two parts. First, a discussion with the panelists, followed by an audience Q&A session. So please share any questions you might have in the chat box, and we will pick up those questions for the Q&A session. So thank you again, and over to Shubham.
Thank you, Sanjeev ji. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to the panelists. Good afternoon to everyone, all the viewers who are listening and who have joined us. Thank you for giving us time. It's a very important day tomorrow. It's International Day for Disaster Risk Reduction. We have been working in the sector. We have the panel here has a very rich experience of decades and decades of work in disaster management. They have seen what India was in 1990s, in the early parts of disaster management, and how the change start to happen immediately after the Lato earthquake, and immediately then post the 2004 tsunami. How was the transition which happened with the establishment of NDMA, the Disaster Management Act coming in, and India as a country has sort of moved a long path in the last 2 decades or so. We at one place were situated where we were struggling to make resources, ends meet in general during our time of disasters. A very specific trivia where during the super cyclone of 1999, more than 10,000 people died. And when in 2013, the fire then happened, we were able to sort of rescue more or less everyone out of it. The number of deaths was in single digits. Although the number of deaths will not define how bad the intensity of a disaster is, but it still shows the path we have covered in the last 2 decades. We are far more better situated when we talk about response. There's a lot of planning which the government has put into with the establishment of NDRF, SDRF, and various battalions ready to help in various states possible. Very recently with the 15 Finance Commission as well, we now have the component which specifically talk about adaptation, mitigation, and pre-preparedness as well. One of the first few countries who have sort of demarcated a certain budget under the disaster management for the country to sort of being utilized on various specific mitigation and adaptation activities. We were having a few dry runs earlier as well, and there was a very important discussion which came in that this is the year where the midterm evaluation of SFDRR, the Sendai Framework of Disaster Risk Reduction, and the SDG is happening simultaneously. We have covered a lot, but there's a lot to cover. There's a lot to sort of put that last part and sort of make sure that there's an exponential rise in our efforts overall to increase the set targets and to reach those targets on time. So on that note, probably I'll call in my first speaker, Mr. Dr. Gopal Krishna Bhatt. Sir is actually writing a book around early warning systems. And what more better way to start and discuss a bit more about EWS, because this is some system, because people living around Delhi, we recently had an earthquake a couple of weeks back. More or less everybody was out. We understand the EWS systems for earthquake is very difficult to achieve, but there are various hazards where the early warning systems and the basic response time can be the change of what can happen on ground eventually due to the intensity of a hazard. So, Bhatta, over to you. The next 4 to 5 minutes will be yours to talk about early warning system, take us through the disaster and risk knowledge and the real-time system which we discussed about. Over to you. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, let's start with something, what is the basics of preparedness? Okay. So the first thing is, we can only prepare for disasters that we already know something about. If you don't know anything about it, you cannot be prepared. Second is, we need to have an anticipatory culture and preventive maintenance culture in us, which is the first step. If you don't anticipate, you can't prepare for. Same way, we have to do all sorts of preventive maintenance. You can have an early warning system, as Sikkim case now shows. They had a early warning system, it seems, but it was not working. Okay, it has to be available 24/7. So early warning is an integral part of any preparedness. It should be available 24/365 hours across a year. And the third thing is the history is a guide, but uncertainty is the rule. Okay, so it is not that history will tell us everything, but uncertainty is what is guiding, especially under the climate change related disasters which are getting. And at the end of it, it has to be us who must deal with the disasters. It's not government's job. It is not others can be only enablers. So unless we know what to do, others can only be guiding us or enabling us. And the last point is, believe in God, but tie the camel's leg, they say in Arab countries. So if you don't tie the camel's leg, you cannot be prepared. Okay. Second is, let's look into what is how do you have an early warning system? What is the basics? First is you have to have the disaster risk knowledge, which I talked about. So unless you have the models, how a flood can be, how much deep it can be, how much area it can be affected, you cannot be prepared. See, for Surat, the 2006 floods, which covered basically 3/4 of the city. Okay, and people are not at all prepared for it, even though it has a history of floods. And the second thing is whole detection and monitoring. Unless you have the early warning system has to be designed based on whatever satellite data is available, whatever weather forecasts are there, that should be the basis of it. And you should have real-time information from the sensors. For example, in Calcutta, we had something like 700 sensors spread across the city, which included rain measuring for 40 rain gauges, around 160 flood sensors across the city. That is the street flood sensors and the school flood sensors. Then we had pumping stations. We were monitoring around 350 pumping stations. But after 3-4 years, they were not able to maintain it up. Okay, that is the ultimate problem. You have the capital expenses the people will put, the governments will put, but maintenance is something they would like to improve. Third thing is the warning dissemination. You can produce fantastic forecasts, you can have all the models, but unless they reach the last person and last mile and last person, it is ineffective. Okay, it has to be in the language which the people understand. Okay, it is not that. See, I'm really worried about a lot of data which is coming out from IMD, but it is not in a language which people can understand. Everybody can understand. So unless you do that, they're doing a fantastic forecasting part, but ultimately, how do you reach people? How do you make people respond? That is an issue. And the last thing about the preparedness and response, unless you pre-position equipment and resources and materials, you cannot be prepared. Okay, and your response mechanism must be fully well-oiled machine, without which nothing can work. Say the Calcutta, every year the floods are there. So the people are not at all prepared. They say, okay, it's going on. But when a big one hits, they don't know how to do. There is no preparedness. That is the thing. And response, is about whole emergency service functions. Who will do what? That has to be clear. Unless that is clear, okay, government will have all the big DMPs written down, but actually they are not trained to deal with the disasters. And the fast response system, we always talk about two things: respite time and response time. Respite time is the time after the warning, how much you will get, and response time is how fast you respond. Okay, I'm finished.
Great, on time, perfect. Thank you, sir. Very interesting inputs around early warnings, internal preparation, the vulnerability which guides the disaster risk knowledge. Live examples from Kolkata and Surat specifically. Balaji, sir, if you may come in and probably we take the discussion forward, where the idea of a response and preparedness-based baseline being considered as the very idea of being redundant in some way, that the data on scenario-based exercises is also required. And what will be the overall sort of financial partnership or sort of learning mechanism for such kind of events, which we can build upon? If you can talk about it a bit. Over to you.
Thank you, Shubham. And firstly, I would like to welcome all the esteemed guests who have come here for the webinar. I think any webinar is not successful with some excellent guests there to participate. So welcome all of you. And I'm a humanitarian response professional. I mean, that has been my core interest in the disaster management. And this is what took me to, the institutional mechanisms which tend to support strong response. So I will try my best to keep my, talk in the realm of humanitarian response and the institutional mechanisms which support the humanitarian response. So, I mean, the first point I feel that what is important today to consider when we are talking of disaster preparedness is what do we want to achieve out of the preparedness? I think a lot of times is it that to have a plan? I mean, a lot of times I went and spoke to people and they said they have a great plan, but they have not referred to it during the response or during the normal time. So what is the purpose of having a response? I think that needs to define the plan, the resources, and more importantly, having a very strong execution plan for what you have planned for. I think, we need to start looking into a planning little differently in terms of why are we planning and am I putting everything together in that plan which ensures certain amount of execution of the plan, not just, getting a great plan. I think that's the first point which I feel is very critical in current days perspective. And the second is, as I think a bit touched by Mr. Bhatt, Mr. Gopal Krishna Bhatt, that currently very traditional mechanisms of having a look at the risk or the vulnerabilities probably are not sufficient. They are great, but they are not sufficient. We are tending to have a lot of asymmetrical, non-linear kind of disasters, and which tend to happen when we don't expect, or which tend to happen in a way we don't tend to expect, and which are also influenced by the climate change and many anthropogenic activities. So we need to have some kind of understanding in terms of how to plan for such. That I feel is having a scenario-based planning. When we sit and talk in terms of potential scenarios for the regions, for the states or districts, we may come out with some of these asymmetrical or non-linear kind of events which can take place, and it is good to have a plan for that so that we are not caught off guard. I think that's the second aspect I think we need to start looking in terms of whenever we do the preparedness. And I feel the third point which I wanted to make at this time is we need to define the minute you want to have some kind of scenario-based planning, we need to go beyond our geographical boundaries of districts or states. I think we need to divide, we need to have certain geoclimatic, regions within the country or within the state, and probably look at the geoclimatic regions in terms of what is it that which can what is it which can go wrong in a normal, and what is it which can go wrong which are non-linear, the asymmetrical kind of events. I think it's very important, and once we have the understanding of geoclimatic regions, then understand what could happen, then probably we'll have a plan for that would be better. And I think next key point I have in mind is about gap analyses. Once again, we do planning, but we probably we don't do it based on a very clear gap analysis. We need to have a strong gap analysis before we go into planning, and especially looking in terms of, do we have the fundamentals in place? Do we have the core capabilities for response in place? And do we have some advanced systems in place? I think gap analysis should be married into the preparedness very clearly, and that will probably come out with a very strong execution plan. So I feel that no plan is going to be effective unless we have a very strong execution plan. Shubham, you mentioned about putting a lot of money for the disaster work in the current currently, but in terms, do we have adequate amount of capabilities down the line to plan and use the money? Is that a gap? Where is the gap?
Yeah.
So this gap analysis, I feel, has to be interdepartmental and interagency gap analysis, and especially looking at three aspects. I feel one is the food security, then second is the health, and the third is the social protection. So if you haven't looked at the gap analysis in these three areas, then plan for it with a strong execution plan, then put the money, then I think it will have a better impact. And that's one. And I completely concur with ideas of Dr. Bhatt or Mr. Bhatt about the early warning in terms of the last mile connectivity. But also in the early warning, we have the great forecast, but again, for this, very symmetrical kind of, whether there's a cyclone, flood, heat wave, yes, we have. But again, can we have a look at certain, non-traditional kind of events such as these avalanches, dam bursts, and all that? Can we start looking at how to do early warning for that? How do we monitor so that we can, potentially prepare or prevent and respond to such events? So I think we need to start going out of our comfort zone in terms of understanding of the events and looking at some of those more complex ones which might happen, which will threaten our lives, livelihoods, and assets. I think that's very important to look at in terms of early warning. How do I do that? And in the last point I'd like to make is, this whole issue of the lessons learned. I think we need to have a strong culture and strong system for lessons learned at different levels, including these geoclimatic regions. What are the lessons, a particular geoclimatic region, jurisdictions can learn, multi-departments can learn. I think there needs to be a very strong lessons learned culture because it is changing so strongly. Trend is towards change, and then try to bring in these lessons learned parameters or whatever the points into the preparedness and response. And I am an incident response system practitioner, and as Sanjeev said, I think this is something which India had been attempting to do, and I feel that we need to have institutionalized incident response system in a much stronger and dedicated manner, so that we have got a better communication management, better resource management, better multi-agency coordination. I think that's a need of the hour. And and also in terms of how do we ensure a lot of people coming together and supporting something happening. I think a strong multi-agency response system where a lot of resources will need to be pulled also from the private sector. I think these are some things which is important for a strong culture of preparedness. Thank you, Shubham. Before you go on.
Yes, I'll come back to you on this again. And very interesting point, actually, the gap analysis and scenario-based exercises. I guess probably when we sort of correlate the learnings from a disaster and map it to a gap analysis, it in itself will give a very good result out of it. Probably we can have a discussion on it further. But now from the early warning system to what Mr. Balaji talked about, the scenario-based issues, Mr. Manu, if you can come in, and we have talked about the convergence per se. We have talked about convergence of climate change with DRR. We have talked about convergence of scenarios and gaps and issues within the system. And we have seen a sort of policy shift, which has moved from a response-centric to a mitigation and adaptation-centric point of view from the government of India as well. So what should be the effect where the policy should now talk more in terms of communities? Because eventually those will be the people who will be first responders. And I guess we have questions around the community's involvement as well. So over to you, Manu, to talk about it a bit more.
Thank you, Shubham. I'm really enjoying this conversation here. Not much left for me to add, but since you highlighted the community dimension, let me speak a little bit about it. So interestingly, while we speaking about the various disaster functions that the previous speakers spoke about, they need to ultimately play at the community level, like you said. Some interesting developments have been taking place in that sphere. I would kind of look at, and this is just purely based on my experience of last, 2 or 3 decades. There is a phase before 2005, 2008, so to say, and then the post 2008, where these changes have kind of pivoted in some way. The earlier phase, where we were working in the field with communities, the kind of attitudes, the kind of response systems were very different, in the sense that communities events, in which the government will come in and they will, save their lives, provide them with some relief, rehabilitate them, and so on. And then, gradually they will kind of move back into mainstream development processes. And that had been a trend all that while. And in that, there were two or three very sort of important or significant issues. One was that disasters affect people differently, and the recent the Nobel Prize for Economics talks about how, economic actors are not assumed to be all rational beings. So a disaster affects women differently, children differently, people with disability. The disaster affects people who have rights and who don't have rights, and people who have been displaced, not displaced. And I think that awareness was not there earlier on, and this led to a very skewed kind of response where a lot of people got left out. And I don't want to get into those details as to how they were left out and what happened to them, but it was very exclusionary kind of a approach that we had. The other was that, it was a very command and control kind of approach. Somebody will come from outside and will save, or will respond to a disaster. And third, as I said earlier, it was always looked at as a one-off event. Now, post 2005, 2008, what I'm experiencing, and when I spend time with communities, is that disasters have become frequent, recurrent, and even more destructive. And I find that, when I speak to communities in Upper Assam, for example, where we've been working for some time, right from one flood season in a year, now they have floods every 3 months. And imagine what that would do to the whole response mechanism, how we look at the now new facet of risk that communities are facing. And I think that's where the challenge lies, Shubham, that we now need to kind of reimagine how we have to approach this issue, looking at the problems of the past, but learning from them. So how do we look at diversity as an opportunity and not as a challenge? Because the earlier on, our diversity was a challenge, and because of that, our strategies were exclusionary. How do we look at command and control to be reimagined as more community-driven, people-led? And like a previous speaker said, how do we make early warning more understandable by common people? I should know that if there is going to be 10 millimeter of rainfall, do I need to evacuate? Do I need to just put my things on a higher elevation, or will I drown? I don't know. How do I interpret X millimeter of rainfall? So I think that agency has to come back to people. And the third is that we need to design for scale. I think our whole idea was like we go with one community at a time and spend time and really prepare them for future responses. But now we are looking at scale simultaneously across the country. Sikkim, Darjeeling, Himachal, so many places getting impacted. Communities, the whole system has to move where communities are able to respond themselves. But our programs need to enable that. So this whole 15 Finance Commission report, which has allocated 45,000 crores plus for the country to use for mitigation, I think has to be dovetailed to a significant extent to enable these community-led approaches. Let me pause here and I can come back on possible solutions. Shubham?
Yeah. Brilliant points, Manu. The entire idea of when we are saying we are more working towards responses specifically, but at the very same time, the one flood season is now converted to 4 flood seasons in a month, and we have been working with various communities, smaller communities. Around in Maharashtra itself, there are places where there is drought, there is floods. So the very multi-dimensional phase of disasters per se is also to be looked into when we plan our early warnings or we plan our pre-preparedness plan towards that. Mr. Bhatt, I would like to call you again on that because it's a very interesting point which Manu and Mr. Balaji has sort of talked about. The early warning system, and you also said that it should be understandable towards the community. What should be the plan of action, sir? If you can talk about certain recommendations in general, that okay, these are the strategies which can be followed to sort of build upon this and make sure that the communities are well prepared for a disaster which earlier might come once every decade and is now coming every year. So over to you, Mr. Bhatt.
Yeah, first of all, no, the science and social society, how do you link them up? That is a big issue. Okay, science talks in all, what is that, so-called different language than what the communities talk about. Say it as Manu was talking about the 10 mm, what do you do? Or 20 mm, what do you do? I think we should have really what Dr. Balaji was talking about, the scenarios. Do we have scenarios? Do we have sufficient scenarios to talk about? The scenarios are understandable by people. Okay. In Surat, we did some very interesting thing. In all the, more than around 100 telephone poles, we marked the green, yellow and red colors, which shows, that how much the flood can come. Okay. What will be the flood level, which is the lowest flood level or the medium flood level and the highest flood level. That made a lot of difference, but unfortunately the real estate guys were not very amused. So the whole exercise went for a 6 because some places the prices will go down, some places the prices. I think making risks visible, that is what we should. The scenarios should lead into making risk visible. Like Japan, they have these tsunami stones, which talked about the last tsunami, where it reached, and do not build below this. Okay, I think that is one thing. And the second thing is, the societies, the communities have to really understand what is the risk there. I was suggesting to Kerala government one time that all the cadastral maps, why don't you put the last flood line? Okay, below this, one is a red part, another is a safe part. But I don't think they really tried it up because that question a lot of. See, it comes with a whole lot of what is that? Political economy gets affected, by making risks visible. I think that we should aim at making it more gently understandable by people. Okay, at the same time, it makes certain changes. Okay, that's what we should aim at. Thank you.
Great. So, Mr. Balaji, making risk visible. Everything comes with its own pros and cons. When risk was made visible, it was helping the community, but at the very same time, there was a big lobby which came from a political will. And it's very important to have a political buy-in when we talk about such interventions which will work directly towards the community. And also, again, when we are talking about marrying gap analysis to a scenario building exercise or learnings to what in general is being happening on ground, I guess this very idea of making risk visible will have its own connotations with its own plus and minuses. Would you like to talk a bit more about the very idea when we assess the policy towards pre-preparedness, the recommendation, and also involvement of these learnings towards the community? Would you be? Yeah,
I think it really sounds as complex as the question itself. Let me try it from another dimension to respond to this. Let me see how the microcosm of this process would work probably, and let's start looking at the macro level policies and all that a little differently. I very strongly feel that when I say micro level, whether it could be at a district level or at a sub-district level, we need to have a very strong stakeholder alliances, including of the community-based organization, community representatives, and could be, and in terms of certain CSR organizations who are willing to fund the mitigation preparedness initiatives, as well as the administration, and have the alliances, and then look at very local based risks. And I think risk is local. Normally, risk starts from my home, then it goes into my street, and it goes into whatever my village, then in. So we need to study the risk very, very locally and identify the responses, and then probably various responses facilitated by the local administration, local communities, and all that. There should be a mechanism to implement and monitor such. Look at how the risk will behave. I think that's one of the ways we can probably some very localized actions, localized study and all of risk and all that, and there's something which can be done at a district level onwards, facilitated by the district administration, could be an answer to some of these challenges which we are facing right now. And then probably taking up. We have a very strong top-down planning. Probably it's a time to start doing a lot of bottom-up planning and looking at bottom-up capabilities in terms of do we have the best of the consultants at Delhi level to do a great national plan, or do I have some very informed people local level who may not know English but who know the risk and who can actually sit and plan for mitigating the local risk, and how do I do it? I think that's a kind of I don't want to out of the way of looking at managing and documenting risk in a different way. I'm sure I think this aspect Manu can probably sort of articulate this better because he's such a strong community-based person. But I feel that the time has come with this great institutional setup we have got. We need to start with a very strong bottom-up planning. I think that could probably be a game changer for India. Thank you.
Yeah. Manu, just to take that forward, when we talk about bottom-up planning and sort of having the presence of individuals on ground who are capable enough. Personal opinion again, I've seen a lot of disaster management work in general in the country right now. It's still very individual-centric. If we have a running eager district magistrate sitting in, say, Barpeta district or a block in Sundarbans, the actions will happen quickly. The early warning mechanism will happen quickly. There will be integration of disaster management planning as well. So, and again, at the very same time, we are also talking about community-based interventions. We are talking about involving local people. The entire discussion, right from early warning, which Mr. Bhatt talked about, the scenario building, the gap analysis is now talked and are now on the shoulders of the community who's running the show on the ground. At the very same time, there is a strong push around tech. Your company has recently come up with Sunny Lives, very interesting AI. And I was in a meeting with Seeds yesterday. Siddharth was here. We were talking about Sunny Lives in general. If you can talk about from a community perspective, probably that idea of building that bottom-up planning and also probably integrating tech around it, I guess, is very important because NDMI system is there in NDMA, but still in 2023, we are missing a lot of data. We still have no idea which individuals are trained at one point of time. What is the status of people who were transferred from one district to another? There are people on ground in Kullu who are nodal officers for 8 different programs. Are they capable enough to sort of be the disaster management focal point for that department? So over to you on these questions.
Yeah, no, you've raised the right issues, and in your intervention, Shubham, you've already shared the nuggets of the solutions that we all need to work to, and Seeds is doing its little bit as a contribution. But yeah, building basically on what Balaji said about bottom-up capabilities and making risk visible. I think the fundamental problem here, which is kind of becoming a blocker for systemic change, is that who's the owner of this risk? And I think Balaji hinted on it, that risk starts from our home, and recognition of risk starts from our home. And that's where I think the common denominator is. What we need to look at is um, if that whole the center and the ownership shifts to people themselves, then it will enable change the way we would want it. And it would not be limited to few individuals, like you said, but it is a system-wide change that we can bring about. Having said that, it is a very daunting challenge, considering the size, the diversity of the problem, and also the nature of phenomena, which is also changing with time. We spoke about how climate impacts are making disasters more frequent, more recurrent, more destructive. So one of the things that we have learned from the development side of our country, and some of those models is in the technology space, like you mentioned. We've seen how in a very short while we've had so many bank accounts open, so many people included in the financial system, how the UPI system has kind of revolutionized the way we make payments, so much so that we are exporting that technology to Western nations. Sadly, we haven't kept the same kind of pace in this risk management space. And I feel that that is an area that certainly requires much more attention. So far, the only technology ingress that has been made is either in the mapping space, in the GIS and that one, or the insurance industry trying to do their bit through some kind of risk modeling, advanced risk modeling. What we are trying to do here is look at building that risk ownership by generating data by people themselves, saying that if it is my land that I have lost in the river of floods, or it is my house, my sheep and cow and cattle, then I should be able to report, and I should be able to make myself visible so that it starts triggering the network effect, where the people from the system, whether it is the NDRF or the government or humanitarian organizations or other development partners, can start processing that information. And once that gets triggered, you are creating some kind of for lack of a better word, a marketplace, where people who are affected by disaster or who are at the risk of disaster, by reporting their losses or potential losses, are becoming more visible. They're becoming more eligible because there is some kind of credentialing happening. And they are also becoming more capable because because of their visibility, they are now having access to knowledge and advanced warning, other information that can help save their lives and their assets. So we are looking at, turning that whole system, reimagining that system by creating a more people-led process, which starts by assessing your own losses and then using AI and machine learning and all of that to generate scenarios, to generate plans, which would then activate multiple partners to come in and support these people. So that's the formula for bottom-up using technology, because technology obviously enables scale, the way we have seen it in UPI and many other models like COVID when the COVID happened. So that's our approach this point onwards, Shubham. Still work in progress, but I feel that we that's the technology is something that we need to leverage in such kind of very complex scenarios.
Yeah, great. Thank you on that. I guess Sanjeev ji, we have covered a lot of things. Yeah, Balaji sir, if you want to come in, yes.
Yes, I mean, there's one point which I wanted to make the last time, but sort of skipped my mind. Is you know somewhere I think we have we have been very good in terms of making uh, partnerships based on finances, funds, grants, probably, uh, and and a little bit of knowledge. I think the time has come where we need to sort of flip it around and have a very many liberal. I think government also needs to step in and facilitate this. Have a lot of knowledge-based partnerships.
Yeah.
Not necessarily the funding, but if people like you and Seeds or anybody sitting at it, if they can have number of knowledge-based partnerships, taking their knowledge, understanding about risk preparedness to several community-based organizations and communities, and providing such support rather than transferring money for activities and all that. I think that could be another game changer, and a very liberal kind of environment for knowledge-based partnerships where we can all reach out to. I think that will trigger a tremendous amount of bottom-up action, in my opinion. Time has come for knowledge-based partnerships.
Yeah.
And globally, nationally, let's learn as much as possible. Let's provide as much as possible, and let it all be so that. And also, knowledge-based partnerships will not be governed by many of your FCRA rules and all that, probably.
Yeah.
And that will actually unleash a lot of energy into a bottom-up planning. Thank you.
Very valid point, Balaji, because when we are talking about making risk visible for everyone, and we are talking about an idea which is people-led, what better way to decide that people should be well aware of what is actually happening on the ground? And knowledge-led partnerships are one of the crucial sort of tools and instrument to sort of take those things forward. Thank you, panel. Thank you for all your inputs. Very interesting discussion, right from early warning to scenario building to gap analysis to AI to machine learning and to what is required to flip the entire site from the top-up approach to a bottom-up approach in general, top-down to bottom-up approach. There are a lot of questions in the QA, and Sanjeev, would you like to bring those questions in, or shall I take it forward?
Yes. Yeah, I would like to bring in some questions here. First of all, a fantastic range of thoughts and really very useful discussion we just had. And now we move to the next part of the session today, to the Q&A. So in this Q&A segment, we have quite a good range of questions from the audience, but some of them are similar to each other. So we are going to take some representative questions. So in fact, Shubham, adding to the point you're making about making people aware. So the first question is on the same, that the ways to stay informed during a disaster emergency situation. And this is an open question. I mean, anyone from our panel and the moderator can respond to it.
Yeah, I'll just share one example. So I'm comparatively newer when we talk about such stalwarts in disaster management. I've been doing this for around 13 years. 2 weeks back, when the disaster came in, when the earthquake came in, the first reaction, what everybody did in the entire office, was to rush out of the building. And I was standing there, and it made me realize that I have been practicing disaster management in this building for last 1 decade, and still nobody went under the table. If there would have been a secondary quake, nobody would have known, because there was only one exit in the building. The other exit was locked. There was no planning per se. So when we talk about learning, I guess a very simple idea is two very basic thing. NDMA has a lot of content on every hazard now. A lot of content is available with NIDM as well. And a very basic thing which the Gen Zs nowadays are very up for it is social media. Do follow pages like UNDP, UNDRR, Seeds, Pari Network, Twitter. There are a lot of content which is available, which can be easily communicated to the communities. Yeah.
So yeah. Any other points on this from other panel members?
I think
No, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think it should start with being willing to look at risk. I also know a lot of people who are risk insensitive. You tell them anything, they say, I mean, it is, I think that example Mr. Bhatt was giving in terms of praying God and tying the leg of they live in neither they tie the leg nor they believe. He said, okay, don't worry, nothing is going to happen. So I mean, I think it should start with me being risk sensitive. I think that's where we also teach people about the potential risk and what impacts can it have, and one way or other. And also, I think just a little bit of elaboration to what Shubham was telling in terms of a lot of material being available in many places. I think that could probably one of the issues also. I think we need to have a very clearly stated information which people have to use, whether it is, I don't know whether it could be NDMA, NIDM, whatever, MHA, but people say, okay, this is what we trust, and or make all this information which is there in multiple places standardized and safe. Okay, so that people go to any site, they find the same thing. So even if they go to multiple sites, they see the same thing, and so there's a certain amount of reinforcement. So if we have got some difference between one site to another site to another site, probably that's where people may tend to get so the same place, so that people have a clarity about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Balaji. And there was also a very important thought which emerged in the discussion about that.
Manu was about to say something. And
sorry, yeah, Manu, please go ahead. My apologies.
Well, no problem. I can take it later as well. But just to add to the string before Sanjeev, the one part is about risk awareness, and that is for sure the starting point. What are the risks around me, and people do not generally realize this as a problem. And the second is the importance of drills or exercises which really get us into the system. We do a program with schools. We've been doing it for some time now, and our school safety programs, Sanjeev, are always starting with children being asked and educated on identifying risks in their environment. And it starts by, going home, filling up a checklist, like a homework given to them about describe your house, how many exits, where is it located, is it close to a river, is it on a sloping land, etc., etc. To then coming to the school and identifying what are those similar risk parameters in the school, and then asking that question, okay, now if there is an emergency, how do you respond to that emergency? Suppose there's an earthquake, do you go under the table, do you rush out, challenges that Shubham mentioned. So I think that kind of a repetitive exercise of assessing, understanding risk, and knowing what to do should kind of get ingrained in the system. With the schools, it has been easy for us because we have a disciplined lot there ready to listen, but it gets more challenging as we go up on the age ladder.
Yes, yeah, that's true. So, Shubham, can I go to the next question? Yeah. So, there is a question about, because there was also some discussion about that how there is a need for developing more community-led disaster response mechanism. So the question is on the same lines that are there some examples of community-led mitigation efforts, which some of the examples any of you can bring from your experiences?
I think there is no better person than Manu qualified to speak on this. I think what he knows, I think Manu, please take over. You know the answer to this the best.
Yeah, I mean, we've all worked together on this, Balaji. So thank you for putting that on me. But I'm sure you have much more of the experience from the region. But just to answer that question, there are n number of examples where communities have led mitigation efforts. They right from identifying potential vulnerabilities in their own environment to then coming into community organizing themselves and then finding the resources and then carrying out works, and those could be from building their own kind of coast like what is coming to my mind is these coastal bioshields off the coast of Tamil Nadu, where communities have created these using natural species, have created bioshields, which is preventing the beach erosion, as well as it is preventing high velocity winds from coming. Needless to say, also dissipating wave heights. And these have been very effective natural barriers for these communities on the coast. So there are a number of examples around, and it's not new science for them. We look at traditional science in this; it's very evolved. Some of the traditional architecture in the Himalayas is very, very resistant to seismic movements. Sadly, we have not kind of consolidated that knowledge and perpetuated it to future generations.
So nice. So moving to the next question, that is very while planning for the risk prevention and disaster mitigation. So what kind of specific considerations for the individual with special needs, which you feel need to be built up into the whole mechanism for Divyangs and other people with special needs?
I'll come in. So I'll share one example on this. In 2019, we developed a disability inclusive disaster management plan for Shimla city. Now, the idea of that planning was to sort of suggest a certain number that if we need to make the entire city disabled friendly, these are the certain structural and non-structural interventions which are required, and this will be a budget accordingly. Now, disable inclusive planning, I guess, is very important in a way because even in our day-to-day operations, the inclusivity is we are far away from the required inclusivity in the normal situation as well. And during disasters, as Manu mentioned, that everybody feels the after effect of disasters in a different way. So for one person, it might be even more difficult to sort of manage. So I guess the idea should be to, make sure that the DM planning includes this component, is inclusive of not only disabled, but gender, but various aspects. Women will be differently affected to disasters. Children will be differently affected to disasters. So the eventual idea will be that this should be a part of the entire planning process per se. When we make sure that these situations around disability, gender, children, and various other inclusive subjects are a part of the overall planning. Over to you, Vatsa.
Yeah, we were doing some work very long back on NCRMP, so cyclone shelters. There, for the first time, earlier, the whole standard was, what is that? People standing. In case of cyclone shelter, the space created was for standing. We talked about 2 or 3 things. One is the people should be able to sit down. Everybody should be able to sit down. Okay. They changed actually the standards itself, the per person space. Second, whole ramps and things like that. Third thing is, school teachers, they were basically designed as schools. So in the schools, there will be shelves put in so that the pregnant women or the old people can actually sleep. It is like multi-layered, what are the shelves where the people can sleep. So these are some of the things which we thought about long back, but I don't know how much of them have been really implemented. But we had thought about these sort of things in designing the cyclone shelters.
Over to you, Mr. Balaji.
My view on this is during disaster times, we are what we are during the natural times, in the normal times, let me put it. So if I am not very sensitive in my normal life, I shall not be sensitive even during the disaster. I think there are much lesser chances that I'll be sensitive. So I think somewhere, a lot of emphasis should also be placed on the non-structural social behavioral patterns. I had gone to some places in one of the eastern states, I don't want to name, where certain social class will not allow another social class to come into the cyclone shelter because they're two different social classes. Even during the cyclone, even when the evacuation take place. So the result was, instead of speaking to this social class, there was another cyclone shelter. So, it is a solution, yes, but is it a perfect solution or an imperfect solution? I think something, and I really taking cue from what Manu said about the schools. I think we have to start probably at that level, talking about the need to be sensitive, the need to be supportive, the need to reach out to help more vulnerable people. Starting from the talking to the young minds first, and an endeavor should be there over a period of time, maybe a couple of decades, and come with this kind of society which is socio-behaviorally sensitive. Thank you, sir. Apart from doing all that, mitigative measures in terms structural mitigation measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Balaji, and Shubham. Thanks. Though there have been few more questions, but now since for the time check, I think most of the key questions have been answered quite adequately, and so now we move forward. And I would like to conclude our conversation today, by highlighting some of the key thoughts and learnings which emerged from today's such a rich discussion. So, like for example, when we were listening to Mr. Bhatt, such an important thought came that history is only the guide, but the uncertainty is the rule. So, any new disaster which the humanity is going to face may have very different scale and connotations and its own challenges. So it is not just that what has happened earlier is going to be there. So history is the guide, but the uncertainty is the rule. And also there was a very important aspect of connectivity between the various aspects of disasters mitigation and the response mechanisms, in terms of how do we use technology like satellite data and real-time information, and even the early warnings also, that how do we keep those extended nodes of early warning always in a operational readiness, because as it is said in the military parlance that more you sweat in peace, less you bleed in war. So in the same way, we learned today that how do we keep those early warning systems by using various technologies. And another most important thing, that though we may have volumes and tons of data, but how do we translate that data into the actionable intelligence for even the common people to understand and make them aware. So that also was a very important thought which emerged. And also there was a very very good emphasis on the institutional mechanisms. Like there was a discussion about pre 2006 state when Manu was talking that and how the things have changed after that. So though while we do appreciate that the reducing number of casualties in disasters is not the only yardstick to measure the success of disaster preparedness, but at the same time it is also giving us enough indication that there is a greater accentuated focus on disaster mitigation from all aspects of the various systems, maybe the government, the institutions, the development sector organizations, the community organizations, the corporates, and all that. But with this, there is a further need to be more prepared. And there was also a lot of discussion on the cultural issues, that how we as a society are more inclusive about when we think about the disaster risk. And we also first understand the risk, that risk starts at our home first. So it is more of a bottom up approach rather than just something cascading from the higher levels of the government to the different sectors and the segments of the society. So there was also a mention about the need for a very strong execution plan. And then how do we see that various risks and the vulnerabilities, that they are not just sufficient? How do we need to have more understanding on uh, ensuring that we are not caught off guard? So there is also a certain positive things happening in terms of greater allocation of funds for preparedness, for disaster mitigation. But then the most important point here is that how those funds are also channelized to uh, build the capabilities and the capacities of the communities in the vulnerable areas. And also very important thought which emerged today was that in terms of how do we do how do we do include the geoclimatic regional mapping in the planning for disaster mitigation, and then how do we do the marriage of the gap analysis into the planning process. So that and how communities need to be more prepared, like stakeholders, they need to ultimately, they need to play at community level. And the response systems have emerged, have evolved. So it is something which we need to that always remember, that it is the community, it is the people who are at the heart of disaster planning and heart of the disaster mitigation and the risk reduction process. And they need to be made more capable of handling those disasters. And very good examples were given, for example, about the Tamil Nadu coastal efforts by the communities there. So with this, I think today we really we thank you all on the panel that for giving your valuable time and really bring in so diverse thoughts and your experiences into this narrative about the disaster risk reduction. And we really appreciate your participation. We also appreciate the participation by all our audience and asking very pertinent questions, which also helped us to get more insights from our esteemed panel members. And last but not the least, a great shout out for Shubham for moderating today's session. Thank you, Dr. Manu. Thank you, Mr. Bhatt. Thank you, Mr. Balaji. Uh, Really, we appreciate your participation, and we are all proud of you, that for your thoughts and for your guidance and the learnings we have. And I'm sure this will be very helpful to our people who have been listening to the webinar. Thank you very much. And with
Thank
this,
you.
we come to the end of our third episode of the New Socia's Facets of Impact Season 3 on disaster risk reduction. Have a great day ahead. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you.